Kia ora koutou katoa. This sermon today is an adaptation of a piece written by Diana Butler Bass called The Thursday Revolution, and you can find that on her blog, The Cottage. The poet Joy Harjo writes, "The world begins at a kitchen table. No matter what, we must eat to live. The gifts of earth are brought and prepared and set on the table. So it has been since the beginning, and it will go on." The Bible reading for the Sunday after Easter, Easter 1, is always the same in liturgical churches. John chapter 20, verses 19 to 31. A story of a Jesus post-resurrection appearance, including the popular account known as Doubting Thomas. The first sentence of that story reads, "When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jewish authorities, Jesus came among them and said, 'Peace be with you.'" The house where the disciples had met is a reference to the house where just a few days before they had had the Passover meal. The house where, in this story, Jesus had washed their feet and called them his friends, where they had shared bread and wine, the house of the upper room. In this Johannine fourth Gospel, in the wake of Jesus' execution and the strange reports from Mary Magdalene of Jesus in the garden, the frightened disciples had gone back to the upper room, gone to perhaps grieve, perhaps to remember, perhaps to await what they thought would be their own arrest. But they had gone back to the place with the table, their last gathering place together. Thus, in this gospel saga, on the night of the resurrection, Jesus showed up there with his friends at the scene of the Last Supper. On Easter, Jesus goes back from the tomb to the table. As Diana Butler Bass points out, and as I said, I'm drawing a lot on her reflection, if you were writing a play about John's version of the death and resurrection of Jesus, the scenes would be table, trial in various locations, cross, tomb, burial, tomb, resurrection, table. The table is the first setting, and it is the final setting of the story. Indeed, when the disciples want to meet Jesus again the next week, they return to the same room to meet at the same table. They never return to the cross. Jesus never takes them back to the site of his execution. He never gathers his followers at Golgotha, never points to the hill of pain and suffering, and never instructs them to meet him there. He never gives value or meaning to the events of Friday. He never mentions them, and he never buys into the later theologies that justify his suffering as paying the price for sin. Jesus never justifies any suffering by anyone, ever. Yes, wounds remain in the story, but how he got them isn't mentioned. Instead, almost all the post-resurrection appearances in the canonical Gospels, which are joyful and celebratory and conversational, take place at the upper room or at other tables and meals. Table, trial, cross, tomb, table. It is, following the recent scholarship, recent being over the last number of years, of the Westar Institute, it's from the table that the passion and resurrection stories came. And it is to the table the story returns time and time again. Bass suggests that the table is the point. Every week, Christians around the world every Holy Week, Christians around the world move towards Good Friday as the most somber, some would say the most significant day of the year. Depending on your tradition, you may sit in silence, reverence a cross, listen to a sermon, recite the 7 last words, or fast in quiet prayer. You may weep, sing mournful hymns, listen to wonderful choirs, feel the weight of injustice. It is a sobering business keeping watch with the execution of an innocent man. For centuries, Christians have been told that everything changed that day. The cross was the bridge between the sinful world and the world of salvation. The cross, we've been told, is all that matters. Somber, yes, the most somber day, of course. But what if it isn't the most significant? What if the most significant day was the day before? The day of foot washing, when the usual and expected hierarchy of teacher and student was levelled. The day of the Last Supper of conviviality and friendship, bread and wine. The day of Passover and God's liberation. What if we've gotten the emphasis of this week, this Holy Week, all wrong? Christians mostly think of Maundy Thursday as the run-up to the real show on Friday. And because the church has placed such emphasis on Friday, we interpret Thursday through the lens of the cross on Friday. Thus, when Jesus shares bread and wine with his friends, it becomes a prefiguring of his broken body and the shedding of his blood, allegedly for the forgiveness of sins. We return to the cross all the time as we read Thursday. We see Thursday through Friday, and from that angle it becomes morbid, a doomed man's final meal while the execution clock ticks. But his friends didn't experience it that way. They weren't thinking about a cross or, God forbid, a blood sacrifice. They saw Friday through Thursday. They were celebrating Passover. They were in Jerusalem with friends and family, not just 12 guys on a long table, sorry Leonardo, but there were women and kids there too, and more, much more than 12. It was a big, busy, bustling holiday meal to commemorate God freeing their ancestors from slavery. Passover is a joyful meal, not a somber one. And because Passover was about liberation from a hostile oppressor, it was fraught with political expectations and possibilities. Would God free them likewise from Rome? Was the promised empire of God at hand? They were thinking about their history and their future, and they were enjoying the supper together. Jesus loved meals. They knew that. They shared so many. If we go back through the Gospels, we will see how many of the stories take place at tables, distributing food or inviting people to suffer. Similarly with parables. Indeed, some have suggested that Jesus' primary work was organizing meals as a way to embody the coming empire of God. Throughout his ministry, Jesus welcomed everyone, to the point of contention with his critics. Welcome them to the table. Tax collectors, all so-called sinners, women, Gentiles, poor, faithful Jews, and those less so. Jesus was sloppy with supper invitations and etiquette. He never thought about who should be seated next to whom. He didn't follow the conventions and entitlement about firsts and lasts. He made the disciples crazy with his lax ideas about dinner parties. All he wanted was for everyone to come, to be at a table and share conversation and food. I think of Jesus, wrote theologian Beatrice Barteau, she says, I think of Jesus setting up these suppers somewhat on the order of the base communities of liberation theology, gatherings of the empire of God. Barteau continues by quoting Rabbi Kushner on Sabbath meals. Kushner writes, and the laughing, the sharing, and the singing, one melody is scarcely spent when another comes forward. We don't even notice the racket of the children. There is great holiness in this room. It grows with the sharing. I take a large ceramic Cottage cup, fill it with wine, offer it to my wife and then the man next to me, who hands it to his wife with a solemn instruction. Here, keep it going. And we do, from hand to hand, drunk from and refilled, time and time again. Sabbath. A vision of the empire of God. The meal reminds us and continues the promise. What if Maundy Thursday was that? The last supper of the old world. The last meal under Rome. The last meal under any empire. And with the ending comes the beginning. It was also the first feast of the empire that is now and coming into being, the empire of God. The first meal of the new age. The world of mutual service, reciprocity, equality, abundance, generosity, and unending thankfulness. Pass the cup. Keep it going, hand to hand, filled and refilled, time after time. The Thursday meal signals the end of dominion, the end of slavery. And this meal is the first meal, which we call communion, the beginning of true freedom. As the Johannine Jesus says, I will no longer call you servants, but friends. This table is the hinge of history. The table is the point. So as Bass says, pull up a chair, bring a friend.